The rain had been light that morning, a soft mist sweeping through the pine-covered hills of the Carpathians, settling over the trail like a warning whispered into the treetops. Lena Kovac adjusted the straps of her weather-worn backpack as she stepped out of the car, the scent of damp earth and moss washing over her like a memory. She glanced at the others, Maxim, tall and wiry, already lighting a cigarette, Roman, quieter than the rest, methodically checking his boots for mud, and Taras, the eldest of the group, unfolding a paper map like an artifact from another time. They had planned this trip for months, a 4-day hike through the less-trodden range southeast of Rokov, far from the ski resorts and summer cabins that dotted the popular trails. Lena, a 30-year-old medical student with a love for landscape photography, had suggested it after reading about the area's untouched beauty in a conservation magazine. Maxim, her boyfriend of 2 years, had been eager to get away from the city, from their growing list of arguments and silences. Roman and Taras, both old friends from university, had agreed out of tradition more than enthusiasm. It was something they did every few years, a kind of male bonding ritual that Lena had only recently been included in. Still, there was something off about the mood that morning, as if the forest itself was reluctant to welcome them. By noon, they had climbed 2 ridgelines and passed a derelict wooden shelter that reeked of mold and rotting bark. They joked about ghosts and hermits, about bears and smugglers, but their laughter sounded small and swallowed by the mist. The plan had been to reach a campsite near an alpine lake before nightfall, but the trail had disappeared under a recent landslide, and the detour cost them 2 hours. Taras, ever stubborn, insisted they could make it if they picked up the pace. Lena, growing uneasy, had suggested turning back and finding a marked trail, but no one listened. They pressed on. The last message Lena's sister received was a photo of the group smiling on a cliffside, with the caption, "Still alive, smiley face." That was at 4:38 p.m. The phones lost signal soon after. By the next morning, their families had already grown anxious. None of them were the type to go off the grid for long, especially not Lena, who kept a meticulous planner and had scheduled her next hospital shift down to the hour. When none of them returned texts or calls by the following evening, Lena's mother filed a missing persons report. Within 24 hours, local police coordinated with mountain rescue teams and volunteers. The search began at the trailhead where their car remained parked, key still in the ignition, a half-drunk bottle of water rolling on the passenger seat floor. The search was methodical at first, grid patterns, drones, thermal imaging. Dogs picked up a faint scent leading up to the landslide, then lost it in the wet soil. A sock was found near the edge of the collapsed trail, but it was never confirmed to belong to any of the hikers. Rain returned 3 days into the search, flooding creeks and making access to the higher elevations nearly impossible. The forest had a way of folding in on itself, masking paths, swallowing footprints. Searchers spoke in hushed tones about how quickly someone could vanish out here, how even trained hikers could wander in circles or fall into unseen ravines. By the 7th day, with no signs of foul play and no new leads, the search was scaled back. Officially, the 4 were presumed lost due to exposure, injury, or misadventure. Unofficially, rumors began to spread about hermits who lived deep in the woods, about human traffickers, about old war bunkers forgotten by time. The families, devastated, refused to believe the worst. Lena's sister, Katya, began posting daily on social media, sharing memories and pleas for information. Maxim's brother organized a crowdfunding campaign to hire private trackers. None of it led anywhere. It was as if the 4 had stepped into the trees and simply ceased to exist. Then, nearly 2 months later, a hiker named Oleg Protsenko stumbled out of the woods near the village of Yavanik, 100 kilometers east of their last known location, claiming he'd found something strange. He'd been bushwhacking a remote part of the forest, following an old logging road, when he came across a cabin he'd never seen on any map. From a distance, it looked abandoned, weather-beaten, with moss growing up its sides, but there was a sound coming from inside, a kind of rhythmic thumping. When he approached, he saw a curtain shift in one window, then someone peeking through. What happened next was chaotic. Police were called. Emergency services arrived. And from that cabin, weak, dirty, and disoriented, emerged Lena, Maxim, Roman and Tara's. Alive, silent, and visibly changed. They said nothing at first, only nodding when asked if they were okay. They were taken to a hospital and strive for evaluation. Physically, they were dehydrated but not severely malnourished. No visible signs of abuse or injury. Psychologically, however, doctors noted symptoms of acute stress response, delayed speech, flat affect, disassociation. They refused to talk about what had happened. Not to family, not to police, not even to each other. Lena, who had once been so expressive, barely spoke above a whisper. Roman avoided eye contact. Tara sat staring at a wall for hours. Maxim cried in the shower the first night and didn't say why. And yet, none of them asked for help. None demanded justice. They simply survived. The investigation into the cabin's location yielded little. It had been there for decades, originally built by a forestry worker in the 1950s. No utilities, no records of ownership, no sign of recent habitation beyond the group's presence. The food inside was minimal: cans of beans, old preserves, a small wood-burning stove. There were signs they'd stayed there for some time. Makeshift bedding, a map on the wall marked in pencil, a broken radio. But no indication of how or why they had arrived there. No vehicle, no tracks, no written explanation. Just 4 people, silent and alive, found 100 kilometers from where they vanished. Theories spread like wildfire. Some said they'd run from something, criminals, perhaps, or a violent argument gone wrong. Others believed they'd gotten lost and found the cabin by chance, surviving on instinct and luck. But the most disturbing theories came from those who believed the silence meant something darker, that the truth was worse than anyone could imagine, that something had happened out there in the wilderness, something none of them were willing to speak about. And then Lena broke the silence, not with words, but with a drawing. She gave it to her sister during a quiet moment in the hospital, folded into the back of a crossword puzzle book. It was a charcoal sketch of the cabin, almost photographic in its detail. But inside one of the windows, in shadow, was the shape of a man. No face, just a silhouette, watching them from the inside. When asked about it, Lena said nothing, but her hand trembled when the nurse took it back. Whatever had happened in those 2 months, whatever led them from the mountains to that forgotten cabin, was not yet over, and it was clear that silence would not last forever. ChatGPT. It didn't take long for the media to descend. The news that 4 hikers, declared missing for nearly 2 months, had been found alive in an unlisted cabin deep in the forest was the kind of story that sparked nationwide attention. Television trucks lined the narrow road near the hospital. Reporters huddled in raincoats and mud-spattered boots, trying to catch a glimpse of the survivors through hospital windows or hear a word from local authorities. But nothing came. The 4 had been placed under protective care, shielded from interviews, and attended by trauma psychologists flown in from Lviv. The hospital's chief administrator issued only a brief statement. The patients are in stable condition. At this time, they are not ready to speak publicly. No press conference. No elaboration. The silence again became the loudest thing. Inside the hospital, Lena stared out the window for hours, her eyes often fixed not on the reporters or trees beyond, but slightly downward, as if she expected something or someone to reappear. Nurses said she hardly slept. Maxim spent his nights pacing the corridor, asking for the time, again and again, every few minutes, as if something depended on it. Roman barely ate. Tara's became prone to sudden fits of trembling, especially when approached from behind. When asked by doctors what they remembered, their responses were the same. I don't know. It's blurry. I think we were just lost. But the medical records told a different story. Their weight loss was minimal, inconsistent with a prolonged period of starvation. Their bodies showed no signs of injury, frostbite, or insect exposure one might expect from surviving in the open for weeks. Their clothing, though worn, had been washed regularly, by the look of it. And then there was Lena's drawing. Katia brought it to the lead detective, Victor Dobrin, who had been assigned to the case from the beginning. He was a quiet, serious man in his 50s, methodical and deeply skeptical. He'd seen dozens of missing persons cases, most ending in tragedy, few with resolution. This one unsettled him. He studied the sketch with his team, noting the window, the silhouette, the precision of the building's features. "There was someone else," he said finally, after several minutes. "She saw someone, and she's trying to tell us." Victor returned to the cabin the next day, bringing forensic teams and officers equipped with metal detectors, luminol, and ground-penetrating radar. The structure sat on a moss-covered clearing, hidden from any established road, accessible only by a narrow animal path nearly invisible unless you knew to look for it. Inside, the air was still damp with the must of old wood and iron. Dust floated lazily in the slivers of light from the broken windows. The bedding was flattened in 4 places. A few tins of food remained stacked on a shelf, labeled in Polish, expiration dates long past. There were no signs of forced entry, struggle, or blood, but there were strange details. A rope nailed taut across the inside of the door, as if to reinforce it from within. 3 small notches carved into the windowsill, uneven and recent. And outside, about 30 meters from the cabin, a narrow hole in the ground, 2 feet deep, half covered with bark and leaves, was discovered by a dog team. Inside was a single leather shoe, warped from moisture. A man's. No matching footprint. No additional trace. The DNA results were inconclusive, degraded by the environment. But what caught Victor's attention was a discarded syringe found beneath the floorboards. It wasn't old, it was modern, capped, with a trace of sedative still in the barrel. He didn't share that finding publicly. Back in the hospital, the 4 survivors were showing slow signs of recovery, but still resisted questioning. Tara's had begun to speak again, only in fragments, asking for a newspaper, then later whispering the word trap, during a nightmare so vivid it required sedation. Maxim, under therapy, admitted to feeling watched in the cabin, even when no one else was awake. He described a sound he couldn't place, metal scraping against metal, every night around midnight. Roman refused to participate in therapy altogether, curling inward, often staring at the ceiling for hours. It was Lena who broke through first. During an early morning session, after a long silence, she looked at the psychologist and asked, "How many days did they say we were gone?" 59, the doctor replied. Lena's eyes widened slightly. It didn't feel like that. It felt shorter, or longer. Time didn't move right. That phrase, "time didn't move right," recurred in several later interviews. She didn't explain it. She couldn't, but it unsettled everyone who heard it. Investigators expanded their efforts, interviewing local hunters, loggers, and even checking with border security in case of abduction scenarios. No one had seen anything. No unusual vehicle, no suspicious activity in the region. The area surrounding the cabin was rarely visited, too steep, too remote. Nothing there to draw people. No one came forward to claim the land. Property records dead-ended decades earlier. Satellite imagery was examined to trace movement over the previous 2 months, but weather and tree cover had obscured most of the area. Every theory met a wall. Then came the second drawing. Lena gave it to her therapist this time. A crude map, charcoal on hospital paper. A long line descending from the cabin, past 3 distinct tree clusters, ending at a black square. "There was another place," she said. "A different building. We were taken there before the cabin." That statement electrified the investigation. Victor returned with the search team, retracing the trail based on the drawing. After a day of trudging through thick brush and steep slopes, they found it. Not a building, but the sunken remnants of a concrete bunker. Overgrown, burnt, nearly collapsed. Inside, only fragments remained, charred beams, what looked like the twisted frame of a bed, and melted plastic containers. Whatever had happened there had been purposefully erased. But the discovery changed everything. A forensic team found a hair sample lodged in the concrete, Lena's. It confirmed her memory. They had been moved. At some point during those missing 59 days, the 4 were taken from that place to the cabin. But by whom? And why? No vehicles had been recorded in the area. No known access roads. No tire tracks. It was impossible to imagine they had wandered, starved, and stumbled upon 2 separate structures so far from their intended path. Someone had taken them. Someone had watched them. And now they were free. But the mystery remained. Who had kept them? What had they done? And why had they been released, not killed? Victor met with Lena privately, off the record. He showed her a satellite image of the bunker ruins, and without hesitation, she pointed to it. That's it. Then she said something that chilled him. The lights didn't come from outside. They were already on when we woke up. What lights? He asked. There were lamps. A whole room. Like a hospital room. But dirty. Too clean to be nothing. Too broken to be real. She paused. They knew our names. They didn't hurt us. But they wanted us to be quiet. Who? I don't know, she whispered. I never saw their faces. Just gloves. Maxim, hearing about the conversation, refused to confirm or deny anything. Tara's muttered something about tests and timing. Roman didn't speak at all. The deeper Victor pressed, the more the silence returned. But one thing was clear. The day Lena vanished from the hospital, the city of Stry felt smaller, less certain, less safe. The nurses' shifts were rechecked, every hallway camera rewound and reviewed, but nothing gave. Her room was locked from the inside. Her slippers were under the bed. The window was shut. There was no sign of struggle, no note, no calls from her phone. The only clue was the charcoal sketch left behind, less detailed than the previous ones, more hurried. The cabin's frame was lopsided, warped. The blackened doorway seemed deeper than paper should allow. The psychologist said it was likely a dissociative episode, trauma-induced. She'd simply walked out, perhaps during staff rotation. But Victor Dobrin didn't believe that. A girl who had barely spoken in 2 months, who trembled at shadows, didn't just disappear into the wind. And not silently. Not again. You don't get to vanish twice, he muttered, staring at the drawing's open door, which seemed to stare back. The other 3 were moved under formal protective custody that same day, relocated to a secure facility outside Lviv. The building was nondescript, a converted school surrounded by pine and rusting fence wire, guarded by quiet men with blank jackets. Maxim had started speaking again in the days before Lena disappeared, mostly in fragments. There was something in the walls. They moved us when it got cold. Roman knows more than he says. When told Lena was missing, he didn't cry or panic. He simply closed his eyes and asked for a cup of tea. Tara's had begun drawing too. On napkins, scraps of paper, even the inside of his shirt collar. Always the same. Long hallways, a metal table, a circle of chairs, a pair of black boots by the door. Roman remained silent, although one night, a guard swore he heard him whispering in his sleep, over and over, the hum, the hum, the hum. For Victor, the case had become more than a missing persons investigation. It had become personal. He requested access to military archives, old bunker maps from the Soviet period, even retired intelligence officers who might remember hidden facilities deep in the Carpathians. Most laughed him off. Half the woods out there are rotting Cold War concrete, animal traps and bad air. Nothing more. But one man, a retired engineer named Anton Kravitz, agreed to meet. He was pale, thin, with skin like paper and a limp that came from years of climbing ladders in underground shafts. When Victor showed him the location of the bunker ruins, Anton went quiet. It was called Sector L9. Off the books. Used by internal science agencies. Behavioral studies. You mean psychological experiments? Victor asked. Anton didn't answer. He simply said, they closed it in 1991. Or so they said. Could someone still be using it? Anton finally met his eyes. Anything's possible in those woods. If someone kept keys. That night, Victor returned to the cabin. Alone. He drove to the last accessible point, then walked 3 kilometers in the rain with a flashlight and a service weapon, unsure what he hoped to find. The air was colder now, sharper. The cabin stood hunched and silent, its roofline like a broken jaw. He entered cautiously. The floor creaked like it had memory. Everything was just as before. Empty food tins, worn blankets, scuffed walls. But there was a new addition, a note, taped to the inside of the door. 3 words, written in thick black ink. IT stays inside. He checked his phone. No signal. He checked his watch. It had stopped. He left immediately. Back at the facility, Maxim refused to talk for 2 days. Then he broke. There was a man, he said. Tall. Clean. Never spoke. He watched us while we slept. We thought he was just in our heads at first. But then Roman found footprints. We weren't alone in the cabin, even when the door was locked. Terrace confirmed it, mumbling something about how food would appear when they weren't looking. We never saw him come or go. But something kept us there. Even after we could have left, it was safer inside than outside. That's the worst part. Roman, finally, spoke one sentence. The tests were never about us leaving. The doctors thought they were slipping into shared delusions. The files began referring to trauma-induced psychosis, group hallucination, and induced memory erosion. But Victor didn't buy it. Not after what he'd seen. Not after the drawing left by Lena, the most recent one discovered days later in a park bathroom in Kalush, over 80 kilometers away. No cameras showed her entering. No trace of how she got there. But the drawing was hers. It showed 4 people standing in a line, facing a wall of trees. Above them, something was drawn into the sky. Something large and rectangular, with legs. It wasn't clear. The style was rushed. But it wasn't a tree. And it wasn't human. Theory spiraled in every direction. Cults. Government mind experiments. Drug-induced captivity. None fit completely. Some thought Lena had never truly left the woods. That maybe none of them had. That may be what had returned were shells. Copying the original, but not quite right. But Victor refused to surrender to madness. He stayed grounded, methodical. He reviewed every local record, interviewed every possible witness. And finally, something broke. A forestry survey team, clearing brush near a restricted reserve area, found a camera. Cracked, soaked, and buried in moss. They turned it in out of habit. It was Roman's. His name scratched faintly under the battery. The memory card was intact. Victor watched the footage in a closed room. There were 6 videos. The first 5 were simple. Roman walking through the forest, pointing the lens at birds, trees. Lena smiling in the sun. The 6th began shaky. A flashlight beam. Heavy breathing. The sound of leaves crunching. And then voices. Not words. Just voices. Echoing. Humming. Someone crying. A sudden scream, cut short. Then static. Then Roman whispering. We're not alone. If this gets found, don't come looking. The tape ended with a shot of the cabin. From the outside. But the window, this time, was glowing. Pale, unnatural. Like a light from behind the wall itself. Victor sat there for a long time. Then he stood and made one decision. To bring the 3 back to the site. To walk them through it. Under medical supervision. With full security. Not for answers, but for clarity. Something had happened in those woods. Something organized. Sustained. Controlled. And the survivors, whether they realized it or not, were still inside it. Even here. Even now. The forest wasn't done with them. And the silence wasn't silence at all. It was waiting. ChatGPT. They were hesitant, of course, Roman the most. He hadn't uttered another word since the night he whispered, "We're not alone." Maxim agreed first, quietly and without expression, like he had already been waiting for the invitation. Terrace followed only after a long silence and a brief glance toward the trees through the barred window of the facility. None of them asked about Lena. None of them mentioned the cabin by name. The psychiatric board protested, but the Interior Ministry overruled them. Victor Dobrin had made his case. If there were any chance the location might trigger memory recovery, real, actionable evidence, it had to be taken. And deep down, no one wanted to admit they had no other path forward. A week later, a convoy of 3 black vans crept up the steep forest road near the edge of the protected zone where the camera had been found. The air was sharper now. October. Leaves had started falling in sheets of orange and brown, blanketing the path with a deceptive softness. Armed security flanked each vehicle, their radios whispering every 30 seconds. Victor rode in the lead, sitting beside Maxim, who stared at the window, unmoving, except to blink. Roman sat in the rear, a medic at his side. Terrace had brought nothing but a worn notebook he kept in both hands like it would be stolen. They reached the trailhead at noon. From there, it was nearly 4 kilometers on foot. They hiked in silence, boots crunching over wet needles and hidden roots. the air thick with the scent of lichen and old pine. It was Maxim who stopped first. His breath caught. "It's here," he said. "Not the cabin, the clearing. The one from the drawing." They stepped through a tangle of fir branches, and suddenly it was in front of them, a ring of moss-covered stumps, arranged with eerie precision. In the center stood a charred wooden pole, broken in half. Around it, bones small, scattered, animal mostly, but one looked human, a fingertip phalanx. The forensic team moved in silently, gloved hands brushing soil and sifting ash. Roman refused to look. Tara sat down on one of the stumps and began to hum, low and shaky. "This was where they watched us," Maxim said, his voice thin. "Not from the trees, from below." He knelt and pointed to a depression near the base of the pole, half filled with mud. "There was a hatch here. We covered it. We forgot why." They excavated it slowly. Beneath the surface was a rusted steel hatch, welded shut, burned at the edges. A symbol carved into it, 3 vertical lines crossed by one. Not military, not religious. Something else. Something made to be forgotten. Victor didn't wait. He called for a blowtorch. The cutting took hours. The sun began to slip behind the ridge, casting the clearing into long shadows. Roman paced like a man fighting sleep. Maxim stared at the flames as if hypnotized. And Teres began to draw again. On his palm this time, using a piece of ash. A door. With an eye. The hatch groaned and split open. Inside, a ladder descending into black. The smell was immediate. Dust, rust, something chemical. Victor ordered lights, masks, a camera crew. Maxim volunteered to go first. "I know the steps," he said. "I know which ones squeak." One by one, they descended into a narrow chamber, 10 meters underground. It was dry, cold, cement walls lined with old wires and peeling paint. Along one side, 3 cots, a metal table, a plastic chair bolted to the floor, and written on the wall in red, "You are here." No blood, no signs of death, but there was something in the air, a hum, so faint it could be missed unless you stood still. Like a fluorescent light, left running underground for decades. Maxim walked to the far wall and touched it. "We were here," he said, "before the cabin." "Who brought you?" Victor asked. Maxim looked at him. "He didn't bring us. He found us." In the far corner was a door, steel, heavy, with a number keypad above the handle. No power, no way in. It looked untouched for years, but on the floor before it, 4 footprints. Bare. Human. One pair smaller than the others. Female. "Lena," whispered Teres. "She was here last." The cameras captured everything. Forensic techs collected samples, dusted prints. No match in any national database. And then they found it, a journal, tucked into a panel behind one of the cots. Pages damp but legible. Handwritten. It wasn't signed. It wasn't dated. But the first line read, "They think the forest ends at the trees. It doesn't." The pages that followed were strange, disjointed. Descriptions of darkness that moved, of meals that arrived without sound, of questions written on walls overnight. Would you stay if no one looked for you? How long can a mind remain whole without daylight? What is memory if not permission? The final page was smeared, as if written in panic. "The man in the clearing is not alone." And beside that line, a small charcoal sketch of a face, eyeless, no mouth, just a shape, human enough to fool you, inhuman enough to know you wouldn't scream. That night, back at the temporary command camp near the road, Victor sat alone by the fire, reading the journal again. He couldn't sleep. The forest made sleep feel like surrender. Then a call came from a ranger station 20 kilometers east. A woman had been seen walking barefoot along a dried riverbed, clothes torn, face unreadable, not speaking. The man who spotted her had only seen her for a moment, but he took a picture from his porch with a zoom lens. It was Lena, or someone who looked like her, pale, eyes dark, staring straight at the camera. Her hand was raised, not waving, pointing. The picture was time-stamped 2 hours before the hatch was opened, before they found her footprints, before Maxim had remembered the steps, Victor enlarged the photo. Behind her, barely visible through the blur, stood something else. Tall, slightly bent, a shape behind the trees. Watching. It wasn't a man. It wasn't a shadow. It was the forest, leaning in. ChatGPT. The road ended long before they found it. 200 kilometers northeast of the cabin, beyond any marked trail, past where even hunters claimed the trees grew wrong. A team of rangers, led by a civilian named Anton Rebin, stumbled across what they later described only as a house that shouldn't be there. Victor Dobrin arrived by helicopter 3 days later, accompanied by 2 forensic pathologists, 3 armed men, and Maxim. Roman refused to come. Taras had vanished the morning after they reviewed the Lena photo. His notebook was left on his bed, open to a blank page. The house stood in a hollowed-out stretch of birch and pine, its roof sunken at one side, chimney cracked. The wood so old it peeled like skin. But there were no vines, no roots crawling through it, as if the forest feared it. There were no roads to it, no power lines, no paths, no reason. Yet here it was, a 2-story timber home, windows unbroken, door closed, doorbell intact. They approached it slowly. Maxim's hands trembled the entire walk. "We were here before," he said softly. "Or maybe this is where we were supposed to be." The moment they stepped inside, the temperature dropped by several degrees. No bodies. No smell of decay. Just furniture too clean. A kitchen with dry dishes. A rug that looked vacuumed. A living room full of dustless picture frames, but every photo inside was blank. White squares in ornate borders. Upstairs, 4 beds, each with a name written in marker on the headboard. Taras, Maxim, Roman, Lena. Maxim fell to his knees and vomited. In the corner of his room was a tape recorder, playing a looped sound. Someone breathing. Then silence. Then a whisper. "Stay asleep." A forensic officer picked up the device and played it again. Same pattern. Then, faintly, another voice, beneath the breathing. It spoke in Ukrainian, rough and breathless. It took her face. She gave it mine. The next room was worse. Lena's bed was made. Neatly. On her pillow, a single braid of dark hair, tied with a yellow ribbon. In her closet, clothes, dresses she never owned, shoes her size, a photograph of 4 children, faces blurred with age, standing in front of the same house. Outside the window, the forest pressed closer than before. Victor called HQ. He wanted satellite eyes on the house immediately. Infrared scans, anything. The operator paused. "There's no house on the map," she said. "Nothing but tree canopy." "Run a thermal image," Victor said. She did. Her voice returned, quieter. "Sir, I see people. For no, 5 heat signatures. One of them isn't moving. One is too cold. One is wrong. Too large. Not shaped right." The signal cut. Communications went dead for 4 hours. In that time, Maxim walked downstairs, opened a door in the floor behind the kitchen, and entered the cellar. He didn't ask permission. He didn't announce it. He said, "He's waiting," and disappeared. By the time Victor noticed, Maxim was already gone. They followed. The stairs creaked but held. The air was dry but tasted wrong, like burned leaves and rusted iron. At the base of the stairs, another door. Steel. Locked from their side. A single peephole. Victor looked, then staggered back. "What did you see?" the officer asked. "A mirror," he said. But when they opened it, there was no mirror. Only a single chair, bolted to the floor, facing a wall with thousands of tally marks scratched into it. Beneath them, one phrase, etched so deeply into the cement it had cracked. "Lena was never here." They found Maxim in the corner, eyes closed, muttering a single sentence over and over. "It's not a house. It's a shape pretending." He had carved it into his arm, letters crude and bloodied. "Walked out/never left." Victor took him by the shoulders, tried to shake him out of it, but Maxim only smiled. "I remember now," he said. "We were the ones who built it. We made it up so no one else would come." "Come where?" Victor asked. Maxim looked at the wall. "Where it hides until we believe it isn't real." They evacuated the house. Or tried. When they stepped outside, the path was gone. The helicopter? Gone. The clearing? Deeper. The trees closer. Radios didn't work. GPS spun endlessly. They set up emergency beacons. Waited. Hours passed. Then a noise came from the tree line. A voice. Roman. It whispered. It was Lena's voice. But softer. Wrong. Too slow. Then again, Roman. But Roman wasn't there. Maxim began to cry. It's picking us one by one. Whoever remembers most. That's why Tara's left. That night, one officer stood watch while the rest tried to sleep inside the house. The sun didn't rise. The trees didn't move. But something knocked on the front door. 3 times. Deliberate. Measured. And when they opened it, there was no one. Just a mirror. Where the yard had been. Reflecting nothing. Not even the sky. Only the house. Only them. And far behind them, in the reflection, a woman walked down the stairs. She had no face. Just a hand. Pointing. The direction they'd come. The path they thought they'd taken. The one that never existed. And somewhere in the woods behind it all, someone whispered. She gave it mine. ChatGPT. Detective Victor Shevchuk sat on the hospital bench outside Maxim's room, flipping through the last of his notes as the first November frost painted the windows white. It had been 5 days since they found the 4 missing hikers, Maxim, Tara's, Roman, and Lena, inside the decaying hunting lodge deep in the Black Forest Zone. And despite the flood of official reports, radio chatter, and forensic statements, nothing made complete sense. The house had no record of ever being constructed. Satellite images from a year ago showed only dense trees where it stood. Yet when they'd entered, it looked as though people had lived there for decades. Wooden utensils, an old iron stove, beds with names etched into the frames, food jar sealed in 1997, and a single, silent radio hooked up to an old car battery. The 4 survivors were gaunt, dehydrated, and confused. Lena hadn't spoken a word since being rescued. Tara seemed fully aware, but would only answer with vague phrases like, "We waited our turn," and the door opened when it was ready. Roman cried for hours when they airlifted him, not from relief, but terror, clutching a children's book they found in his hand titled Where You Wait, You Stay. Maxim, the only one coherent enough to piece fragments together, kept repeating that the house wasn't always a house. Sometimes it was the mountain, he whispered to Victor. Sometimes the cave. But it always had a door, and it only opened one way. Psychiatric evaluations offered little. Trauma, severe dehydration, shared delusion. The official press release stated they had wandered under extreme duress into an unregistered property during a prolonged fugue caused by starvation. But Victor had seen too many things to buy that. The tally marks in the basement didn't match the number of days they'd been missing. There were 143. Someone had scratched the words, "We were 5, into the underside of a bedpost. But only 4 had been reported missing. And when Victor confronted Maxim about it, the man grew pale and said, "Don't ask about the 5th. It wasn't one of us." The regional investigation closed 2 weeks later under quiet pressure from Kiev. No further media. No interviews. The house was gone when they returned with a full search team. Its location overgrown. Not a stone or nail left. Drone footage captured only a clearing of untouched moss. Lena moved abroad, changed her name, and refused all contact. Roman returned to his parents in Lviv and stopped leaving his room. Taras died by suicide 3 months later. His note simply read, "It's still open." Maxim now lived under state care, lucid only during thunderstorms. He once told a nurse, "The door is everywhere, just hard to see unless you're lost." Victor left the force a month after closing the file, but he couldn't stop thinking about the forest, the silence of the house, and the feeling that something had watched them leave. Years later, he would still dream of a hallway with 5 doors, and behind one of them, something knocking gently, not to get out, but to be let in.